wisest king who ever lived turned to demon worship? What secret did Hezekiah discover that saved Jerusalem when 185,000 enemy soldiers died in a single night? 2 Chronicles isn't just history, it's prophecy written in reverse. Every crown that rose, every altar torn down, every miracle and judgment was pointing to something far greater. The patterns hidden in these 36 chapters reveal the very heartbeat of God's eternal plan. Kings rise and fall, but the throne of David, that story is still being written. What you're about to discover will change how you see not just the past, but the future that's already unfolding. The Chronicles aren't over, you're living in them. The young king stood before the great altar at Gibeon, the most important worship place in all Israel. Solomon had come here with 1,000 burnt offerings, showing God just how serious he was about seeking divine guidance. This wasn't just any place. It was where Moses' original tabernacle stood, and where the bronze altar that God had commanded still received sacrifices. That night something extraordinary happened. As recorded in chapter 1 verse 7, God appeared to Solomon and said to him, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Can you imagine? The creator of the universe was offering a blank check to a young man who had just inherited the most powerful kingdom on earth. Solomon's response reveals the heart that would make him legendary. In verses 8 to 10, he said, "You have shown great kindness to David my father, and have made me king in his place. Now, Lord God, let your promise to my father David be confirmed, for you have made me king over a people who are as numerous as the dust of the earth. Give me wisdom and knowledge that I may lead this people, for who is able to govern this great people of yours?" God was delighted. The young king could have asked for riches, long life, or victory over his enemies. Instead, he asked for wisdom to serve others well. Chapter 1, verses 11-12 record God's response. "Since this is your heart's desire, and you have not asked for wealth, possessions, or honor, nor for the death of your enemies, and since you have not asked for a long life, but for wisdom and knowledge to govern my people over whom I have made you king, therefore wisdom and knowledge will be given you. And I will also give you wealth, possessions, and honor, such as no king who was before you ever had, and none after you will have." When Solomon woke up, everything had changed. He returned to Jerusalem knowing that God himself had chosen him for greatness. Solomon knew he couldn't build God's house alone. The temple required materials and skills that Israel didn't possess. So he looked north to Tyre, where King Hiram ruled over master craftsmen and controlled the finest cedar forests in the world. The correspondence between these two kings, preserved in chapter 2, shows Solomon's diplomatic genius. Starting in verse 3, Solomon wrote, "Send me cedar logs as you did for my father David, when you sent him cedar to build a palace to live in. Now I am about to build a temple for the name of the Lord my God, and to dedicate it to him." But Solomon wasn't just asking for wood. He needed something even more valuable, expertise. In verses 7 to 8, he continued, "Send me, therefore, a man skilled to work in gold and silver, bronze and iron, and in purple, crimson, and blue yarn, and experienced in the art of engraving, to work in Judah and Jerusalem with my skilled workers, whom my father David provided. Send me also cedar, juniper, and algum logs from Lebanon, for I know that your servants are skilled in cutting timber there." Hiram's response was immediate and enthusiastic. Chapter 2, verse 11 records his reply, "Because the Lord loves his people, he has made you their king." This pagan king recognized that something divine was happening in Israel. The deal they struck was massive. Solomon would provide 20,000 kor of ground wheat, 20,000 kor of barley, 20,000 baths of wine, and 20,000 baths of olive oil every year. In return, Hiram would send not just materials, but also his most skilled craftsmen. A man whose mother was from Israel, but whose father was from Tyre, making him the perfect bridge between two cultures. Finally, the moment had arrived. Chapter 3, verse 1 tells us exactly where this would happen. Then Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David. It was on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, the place provided by David. This wasn't random. Mount Moriah was where Abraham had nearly sacrificed Isaac centuries before. It was where David had seen the angel of the Lord and built an altar. Now it would become the dwelling place of God's name forever. The temple's dimensions were breathtaking. Chapter 3, verse 3 gives us the measurements. The foundation Solomon laid for building the temple of God was 60 cubits long and 20 cubits wide. That's roughly 90 feet long and 30 feet wide. But it was the height that truly amazed people. Verse 4 tells us the front portion was 20 cubits high. Everything was covered in gold. Verse 4 continues, he overlaid the inside with pure gold. But this wasn't just a thin layer. Verse 8 reveals that he overlaid the most holy place with gold, and the gold weighed 600 talents. That's over 20 tons of pure gold in one room alone. The most holy place was where God would dwell. Chapter 3, verses 10 to 13 describe the two cherubim that Solomon placed there. For the most holy place, he made a pair of sculptured cherubim and overlaid them with gold. The total wingspan of the cherubim was 20 cubits. The cherubim stood on their feet facing the main hall. These weren't cute baby angels. They were massive guardians with wings that stretched from wall to wall, protecting the space where the Ark of the Covenant would rest. While gold dominated the interior, bronze was the star of the temple courtyard. Chapter 4 opens with the bronze altar. He made a bronze altar 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 10 cubits high. But even more impressive was what came next. Verse 2 introduces us to one of the ancient world's engineering marvels. He made the sea of cast metal, circular in shape, measuring 10 cubits from rim to rim and 5 cubits high. It took a line of 30 cubits to measure around it. This wasn't just a large bowl. The sea was massive, 15 feet across and 7.5 feet deep. But the real wonder was what supported it. Verses 3 to 4 explain, below the rim, figures of bulls encircled it, 10 to a cubit. The bulls were cast in 2 rows in one piece with the sea. The sea stood on 12 bulls, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. Imagine the skill required to cast bronze bulls strong enough to support thousands of gallons of water, yet detailed enough to be works of art. This is where the priests would wash before serving in God's house. But Huram-Abi wasn't finished. Chapter 4, verses 6 to 8 list his other creations. He then made 10 basins for washing and placed 5 on the south side and 5 on the north. In them the things to be used for the burnt offerings were rinsed, but the sea was to be used by the priests for washing. He made 10 gold lampstands according to the specifications for them and placed them in the temple, 5 on the south side and 5 on the north. He also made 10 tables and placed them in the temple, 5 on the south side and 5 on the north. And he made 100 gold sprinkling bowls. Every piece had a purpose. Every detail mattered. This was furniture fit for the King of Kings. The temple was complete, but it was still just an empty building. Everything changed when Solomon called together all the elders of Israel, all the heads of the tribes and the chiefs of the Israelite families, to bring up the most sacred object in their history, the Ark of the Covenant. Chapter 5, verse 2 sets the scene. Then Solomon summoned to Jerusalem the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes, the leaders of the Israelite families, to bring up the Ark of the Lord's covenant from Zion, the city of David. This wasn't a quiet ceremony. Verse 5 tells us, King Solomon and the entire assembly of Israel that had gathered about him were before the ark, sacrificing so many sheep and cattle that they could not be recorded or counted. The priests then carried the ark into the most holy place. Verse 7 records this historic moment. The priests then brought the ark of the Lord's covenant to its place in the inner sanctuary of the temple, the most holy place, and put it beneath the wings of the cherubim. But something was different about this ark. Verse 10 reveals there was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets that Moses had placed in it at Horeb, where the Lord made a covenant with the Israelites after they came out of Egypt. The golden pot of manna and Aaron's rod that had budded were gone. Only the stone tablets of the law remained, the foundation of everything. Then the moment everyone was waiting for arrived. Chapter 5, verses 13-14 describe what happened next. The trumpeters and musicians joined in unison to give praise and thanks to the Lord. Accompanied by trumpets, cymbals, and other instruments, the singers raised their voices in praise to the Lord and sang, "He is good. His love endures forever." Then the temple of the Lord was filled with the cloud, and the priests could not perform their service because of the cloud. For the glory of the Lord filled the temple of God. God had moved in, standing before the newly filled temple. Solomon knew this moment would never come again. Chapter 6, verse 12 tells us, "Then Solomon stood before the altar of the Lord, in front of the whole assembly of Israel, and spread out his hands." What followed was one of the most beautiful prayers ever recorded. Solomon began in verse 14, "Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven or on earth, you who keep your..." But Solomon understood something profound about God. Even though they had built this magnificent temple, he knew in verse 18, "But will God really dwell on earth with humans? The heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built?" Yet God had chosen to put his name there. Solomon prayed for every situation his people might face. His prayer in verses 36-39 shows his heart. "When they sin against you, for there is no one who does not sin, and you become angry with them and give them over to the enemy, who takes them captive to a land far away or near. And if they have a change of heart in the land where they are held captive, and repent and plead with you in the land of their captivity and say, 'We have sinned, we have done wrong and acted wickedly,' and if they turn back to you with all their heart and soul in the land of their captivity where they were taken, and pray toward the land you gave their ancestors, toward the city you have chosen, and toward the temple I have built for your name, then from heaven, your dwelling place, hear their prayers and their pleas, and uphold their cause, and forgive your people who have sinned against you." When Solomon finished praying, something incredible happened. Chapter 7, verse 1 records, "When Solomon finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple." The people's response was immediate. Verse 3 continues, "When all the Israelites saw the fire coming down and the glory of the Lord above the temple, they knelt on the pavement with their faces to the ground. And they worshipped and gave thanks to the Lord, saying, 'He is good. His love endures forever.'" God had accepted their offering with supernatural fire, just as he had done for their ancestors. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Israel had ever seen. Chapter 7, verse 4 tells us, "Then the king and all the people offered sacrifices before the Lord, but the numbers are staggering." Verse 5 continues, "King Solomon offered a sacrifice of 22,000 head of cattle and 120,000 sheep and goats. So the king and all the people dedicated the temple of God. For 14 days, the entire nation celebrated." Verse 8 describes the scope. "So Solomon observed the festival at that time for 7 days, and all Israel with him. A vast assembly, people from Lebo Hamath to the Wadi of Egypt. But the real climax came when everyone had gone home." Chapter 7, verse 12 records a private moment. "The Lord appeared to Solomon at night and said, 'I have heard your prayer and have chosen this place for myself as a temple for sacrifices.' Then God made both a promise and a warning that would echo through Israel's history. Verses 14-15 contain words that would be quoted for generations. "If my people, who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Now my eyes will be open and my ears attentive to the prayers offered in this place." But there was another side to this covenant. Verses 19 to 20 delivered a sobering warning. But if you turn away and forsake the decrees and commands I have given you, and go off to serve other gods and worship them, then I will uproot Israel from my land, which I have given them, and will reject this temple I have consecrated for my name. The choice was now Israel's to make, with the temple complete. Solomon turned his attention to the rest of his kingdom. Chapter 8, verse 1 tells us, at the end of 20 years, during which Solomon built the temple of the Lord and his own palace, but his building projects went far beyond Jerusalem. Verses 4 to 6 list some of his major works. He also built up Tadmor in the wilderness, and all the store cities he had built in Hamath. He rebuilt Upper Beth-horon and Lower Beth-horon as fortified cities, with walls and with gates and bars, as well as Baalath and all his store cities, and all the cities for his chariots and for his horses, whatever he desired to build in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and throughout all the territory he ruled. But Solomon's real genius was in organization. He solved the labor problem through careful management of different groups. Verses 7 to 8 explain, there were still people left from the Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Solomon conscripted the descendants of all these peoples remaining in the land, whom the Israelites had not destroyed, to serve as slave labor, as it is to this day. However, verse 9 shows his care for his own people. But Solomon did not make slaves of the Israelites for his work. They were his fighting men, commanders of his captains, and commanders of his chariots and charioteers. Most importantly, Solomon established the regular worship that would continue for centuries. Verses 12 to 13 record, on the altar of the Lord that he had built in front of the portico, Solomon sacrificed burnt offerings to the Lord, according to the daily requirement for offerings commanded by Moses for the Sabbaths, the new moons, and the 3 annual festivals, the festival of unleavened bread, the festival of weeks, and the festival of tabernacles. He organized the priests and Levites exactly as his father David had planned. Verse 14 tells us, in keeping with the ordinance of his father David, he appointed the divisions of the priests for their duties, and the Levites to lead the praise, and to assist the priests according to each day's requirement. By chapter 9, Solomon's fame had spread to the ends of the earth. The golden age of Israel was at its peak. The moment that would change Israel forever began at Shechem, where all the tribes had gathered to crown Solomon's son as their new king. But Rehoboam faced an unexpected challenge before he could even sit on the throne. The people had a request that would test his wisdom from day one. Chapter 10 verse 3 tells us that they sent for Jeroboam, and he and all Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, this wasn't just a small group of complainers. This was the entire nation speaking with one voice. Their message was simple but urgent, as recorded in verse 4. Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. Solomon's building projects had been magnificent, but they came at a cost. The people were exhausted from years of forced labor and heavy taxes. They weren't asking for much, just some relief so they could breathe again. Rehoboam made his first smart decision. Verse 5 shows his wisdom. Rehoboam answered, come back to me in 3 days. So the people went away. He knew this decision was too important to rush. First, he consulted with the older men who had served his father. Chapter 10 verses 6-7 record their advice. Then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. How would you advise me to answer these people? He asked. They replied, if you will be kind to these people and please them and give them a good answer, they will always be your servants. This was perfect advice. A little kindness would have secured his kingdom forever. But then Rehoboam made a fatal mistake. Verse 8 tells us, but Rehoboam rejected the advice the elders gave him and consulted the young men who had grown up with him and were serving him. These young advisors had never known hardship. Their advice, recorded in verses 10-11, was exactly what you'd expect. The young men who had grown up with him replied, These people have said to you, 'Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter.' Now tell them, 'My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions.'" When the 3 days ended and the people returned, Rehoboam's response sealed Israel's fate. Verses 13-14 record his harsh words. The king answered them harshly. Rejecting the advice of the elders, King Rehoboam followed the advice of the young men and said, "My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Verse 16 captures the moment of no return. When all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king, "What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel. Look after your own house, David." Indeed, so all the Israelites went home. Just like that, the united kingdom of Israel was over. 10 tribes walked away from David's dynasty, and only Judah and Benjamin remained loyal to Rehoboam. Rehoboam's first instinct was exactly what you'd expect from a young king who had just lost most of his kingdom. He wanted to fight to get it back. Chapter 11 verse 1 tells us, when Rehoboam arrived in Jerusalem, he mustered Judah and Benjamin, 180,000 able-bodied men, to go to war against Israel and to regain the kingdom for Rehoboam. But God had other plans. Verse 2 introduces us to a prophet whose words would save thousands of lives. But this word of the Lord came to Shemaiah, the man of God. Shemaiah's message was clear and direct, as recorded in verses 3-4. "Say to Rehoboam, son of Solomon, king of Judah, and to all Israel in Judah and Benjamin, this is what the Lord says, do not go up to fight against your fellow Israelites. Go home, every one of you, for this is my doing." The prophet made it clear that the kingdom's division wasn't a political accident. It was God's judgment. What happened next shows that people in those days still respected God's voice. Verse 4 simply states, "So they obeyed the words of the Lord and turned back from marching against Jeroboam." Can you imagine? 180,000 soldiers ready for battle simply went home because a prophet said God didn't want them to fight. But Rehoboam wasn't going to sit around doing nothing. Verses 5-10 list his impressive fortification program. Rehoboam lived in Jerusalem and built up towns for defense in Judah: Bethlehem, Edam, Tekoa, Beth-zur, Soko, Adullam, Gath, Maresha, Ziph, Edoraim, Lachish, Azekah, Zorah, Aijalon, and Hebron. These were fortified cities in Judah and Benjamin. He strengthened their defenses and put commanders in them with supplies of food, olive oil, and wine. But the real blessing came from an unexpected source. When Jeroboam set up his golden calves in the north and appointed non-Levite priests, the faithful religious leaders made a choice that strengthened Judah tremendously. Verses 13-14 tell us, the priests and Levites from all their districts throughout Israel sided with him. The Levites even abandoned their pasture lands and property and came to Judah and Jerusalem, because Jeroboam and his sons had rejected them as priests of the Lord. This migration wasn't just about priests, it was about all the faithful people who wanted to worship God correctly. Verse 16 explains, those from every tribe of Israel who set their hearts on seeking the Lord. The God of Israel followed the Levites to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices to the Lord, the God of their ancestors. For 3 years, this influx of godly people made all the difference. Verse 17 summarizes this golden period. They strengthened the kingdom of Judah and supported Rehoboam, son of Solomon, 3 years, following the ways of David and Solomon. During this time, everything changed in Rehoboam's 4th year. Success had made him proud, and when people feel secure, they often forget why they needed God in the first place. Chapter 12, verse 1 describes what happened. After Rehoboam's position as king was established and he had become strong, he and all Israel with him abandoned the law of the Lord. This wasn't just the king's personal failure, it was a national apostasy. The very people who had benefited from God's protection now turned their backs on him. God's response was swift and unmistakable. Verse 2 tells us, because they had been unfaithful to the Lord, Shishak, king of Egypt, attacked Jerusalem in the 5th year of King Rehoboam. This wasn't a random political event. It was divine judgment executed through a foreign king. The invasion was devastating. Verses 3 to 4 describe the massive force that came against Judah, with 1,200 chariots and 60,000 horsemen and the innumerable troops of Libyans, Sakhites and Cushites that came with him from Egypt. He captured the fortified cities of Judah and came as far as Jerusalem. All those fortified cities that Rehoboam had so carefully built fell like dominoes before the Egyptian war machine. Once again, God sent a prophet to explain what was happening. Verses 5 to 6 record Shemaiah's message. Then the prophet Shemaiah came to Rehoboam and to the leaders of Judah who had assembled in Jerusalem for fear of Shishak. And he said to them, "This is what the Lord says. You have abandoned me. Therefore I now abandon you to Shishak." The leaders of Israel and the king humbled themselves and said, "The Lord is just." This time their repentance was genuine and immediate. Verse 7 shows God's mercy. When the Lord saw that they humbled themselves, this word of the Lord came to Shemaiah, "Since they have humbled themselves, I will not destroy them, but will soon give them deliverance. My wrath will not be poured out on Jerusalem through Shishak, but there were still consequences." The price was enormous. Verses 9 to 11 detail what Judah lost. When Shishak, king of Egypt, attacked Jerusalem, he carried off the treasures of the temple of the Lord and the treasures of the royal palace. He took everything, including the gold shields Solomon had made. So King Rehoboam made bronze shields to replace them and assigned these to the commanders of the guard on duty at the entrance to the royal palace. The golden shields that had symbolized Solomon's glory were gone, replaced by bronze copies. It was a perfect picture of how far the kingdom had fallen. When Rehoboam died, his son Abijah became king and immediately faced the same problem his father had dealt with, the divided kingdom. But Abijah chose a very different approach. He decided to confront the religious issues head-on. The confrontation came to a head at Mount Zemaraim. Chapter 13, verses 2 to 3 set up the dramatic scene. He went to war against Jeroboam. Abijah went into battle with an army of 400,000 able-bodied fighting men, and Jeroboam drew up a battle line against him with 800,000 able-bodied troops. The numbers were overwhelming. Jeroboam had twice as many soldiers as Abijah, but Abijah understood that this wasn't really about politics or territory. It was about who had the right to rule God's people. Before the battle began, Abijah did something remarkable. Verse 4 tells us, Abijah stood on Mount Zemaraim in the hill country of Ephraim and said, "Jeroboam and all Israel, listen to me." He was about to give a speech that would change everything. What followed was one of the most powerful theological speeches in the Old Testament. Verses 5-7 contain Abijah's opening argument. "Don't you know that the Lord, the God of Israel, has given the kingship of Israel to David and his descendants forever by a covenant of salt? Yet Jeroboam, son of Nebat, an official of Solomon, son of David, rebelled against his master. Some worthless scoundrels gathered around him and opposed Rehoboam, son of Solomon, when he was young and indecisive and not strong enough to resist them. But then he got to the heart of the matter, the religious corruption that Jeroboam had introduced in the north. Verses 8-9 contain his devastating critique. "And now you plan to resist the kingdom of the Lord, which is in the hands of David's descendants. You are indeed a vast army, and have with you the golden calves that Jeroboam made to be your gods. But didn't you drive out the priests of the Lord, the sons of Aaron and the Levites, and make priests of your own, as the peoples of other lands do? Whoever comes to consecrate himself with a young bull and 7 rams may become a priest of what are not gods." In contrast, Abijah pointed to Judah's faithfulness in verses 10-11. "As for us, the Lord is our God, and we have not forsaken him. The priests who serve the Lord are sons of Aaron, and the Levites assist them. Every morning and evening they present burnt offerings and fragrant incense to the Lord. They set out the bread on the ceremonially clean table and light the lamps on the gold lampstand every evening. We are observing the requirements of the Lord our God, but you have forsaken him. His conclusion was simple and powerful, as recorded in verse 12. God is with us. He is our leader. His priests with their trumpets will sound the battle cry against you. People of Israel, do not fight against the Lord, the God of your ancestors, for you will not succeed. But Jeroboam wasn't interested in theology. While Abijah was speaking, he had set up an ambush. Verse 13 reveals his strategy. Now Jeroboam had sent troops around to the rear, so that while he was in front of Judah, the ambush was behind them. When Judah realized they were surrounded, they did the only thing they could do. Verse 14 tells us, Judah turned and saw that they were being attacked at both front and rear. Then they cried out to the Lord. The priests blew their trumpets. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. Verses 15 to 16 describe the battle's turning point, and the men of Judah raised the battle cry. At the sound of their battle cry, God routed Jeroboam and all Israel before Abijah and Judah. The Israelites fled before Judah, and God delivered them into their hands. The victory was complete and devastating. Verse 17 gives the casualties. Abijah and his army inflicted heavy losses on them, so that there were 500,000 casualties among Israel's able men. Half of Jeroboam's army was destroyed in a single day. The results were long-lasting. Verse 20 tells us, Jeroboam did not regain power during the time of Abijah, and the Lord struck him down, and he died. God's judgment on the rebellious king was final and complete. When Abijah died after only 3 years, his son Asa became king and immediately began doing something that Judah hadn't seen in a long time. He started cleaning house spiritually. Chapter 14, verse 2 summarizes his early reign. Asa did what was good and right in the eyes of the Lord his God. But Asa didn't just have good intentions, he took action. Verse 3 lists some of his reforms. He removed the foreign altars and the high places, smashed the sacred stones, and cut down the Asherah poles. This wasn't just ceremonial cleaning. Asa was systematically destroying every trace of idol worship he could find. His reforms went even further. Verses 4 to 5 show how thorough he was. He commanded Judah to seek the Lord, the God of their ancestors, and to obey his laws and commands. He removed the high places and incense altars in every town in Judah, and the kingdom was at peace under him. The results were immediate and obvious. When a nation turns back to God wholeheartedly, God responds with blessing. Verse 6 tells us, he built up the fortified cities of Judah since the land was at peace. No one was at war with him during those years, for the Lord gave him rest. God's blessing also showed in Judah's military strength. Verse 8 gives us the numbers. Asa had an army of 300,000 men from Judah, equipped with large shields and with spears, and 280,000 from Benjamin, armed with small shields and with bows. All these were brave fighting men. For 10 peaceful years everything went perfectly. But then came a test that would have destroyed most kingdoms. Verse 9 introduces us to a terrifying enemy. Zerah the Cushite marched out against them with an army of thousands upon thousands and 300 chariots, and came as far as Mareshah. The numbers were overwhelming. Most translations suggest that Zerah came with 1,000,000 soldiers, nearly twice the size of Asa's entire army. This was the kind of invasion that usually meant the end of nations, but Asa had learned something during those 10 years of peace. Verse 11 records one of the most beautiful prayers in the Old Testament. Then Asa called to the Lord his God and said, Lord, there is no one like you to help the powerless against the mighty. Help us, Lord our God, for we rely on you, and in your name we have come against this vast army. Lord, you are our God. Do not let mere mortals prevail against you. The answer came immediately. Verse 12 tells us, the Lord struck down the Cushites before Asa and Judah. The Cushites fled. It wasn't a close battle or a hard-fought victory. God simply struck down the enemy and they ran. The victory went beyond just one battle. Verses 14-15 show how complete God's deliverance was. They destroyed all the villages around Gerar, for the terror of the Lord had fallen on them. They raided all these villages, since there was much plunder in them. They also attacked the camps of the herders, and carried off droves of sheep and goats and camels. Then they returned to Jerusalem, fresh from his miraculous victory over the Cushites. Asa was returning to Jerusalem when God sent him a message that would spark the greatest revival Judah had seen since Solomon's early years. Chapter 15, verse 1 introduces the messenger. The Spirit of God came on Azariah, son of Oded. This wasn't just human wisdom or political advice. This was a direct word from the Lord. Verses 2-3 record the prophet's message. He went out to meet Asa and said to him, "Listen to me, Asa and all Judah and Benjamin. The Lord is with you when you are with him. If you seek him, he will be found by you, but if you forsake him, he will forsake you." For a long time Israel was without the true God, without a priest to teach, and without the law. But the message wasn't all warning. Verses 4 and 7 contain tremendous encouragement. But in their distress they turned to the Lord, the God of Israel, and sought him, and he was found by them. But as for you, be strong and do not give up, for your work will be rewarded. The prophet's words had an immediate impact. Verse 8 tells us, when Asa heard these words and the prophecy of Azariah, son of Oded the prophet, he took courage. He removed the detestable idols from the whole land of Judah and Benjamin, and from the towns he had captured in the hills of Ephraim. He repaired the altar of the Lord that was in front of the portico of the Lord's temple. The climax came in the 3rd month of Asa's 15th year. Verse 10 sets the scene. They assembled at Jerusalem in the 3rd month of the 15th year of Asa's reign. This wasn't just a small ceremony. It was a massive national gathering. The people came prepared to worship seriously. Verse 11 tells us, at that time they sacrificed to the Lord 700 head of cattle and 7,000 sheep and goats from the plunder they had brought back. But the real heart of the gathering was what happened next. Verses 12-13 describe a moment that changed the nation. They entered into a covenant to seek the Lord, the God of their ancestors, with all their heart and soul. All who would not seek the Lord, the God of Israel, were to be put to death, whether small or great, man or woman. The ceremony was joyful and enthusiastic. Verses 14-15 capture the atmosphere. They took an oath to the Lord with loud acclamation, with shouting and with trumpets and horns. All Judah rejoiced about the oath because they had sworn it wholeheartedly. They sought God eagerly, and he was found by them. So the Lord gave them rest on every side, but Asa's reforms went even deeper than public ceremonies. Verse 16 shows how serious he was. King Asa also deposed his grandmother Maacah from her position as queen mother because she had made a repulsive image for the worship of Asherah. Asa cut it down, crushed it, and burned it in the Kidron Valley. The chapter ends with a summary of this golden period. Verse 19 tells us, there was no more war until the 35th year of Asa's reign. Everything changed in the 36th year of Asa's reign. Chapter 16, verse 1 introduces the crisis. In the 36th year of Asa's reign, Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah and fortified Ramah to prevent anyone from leaving or entering the territory of Asa, king of Judah. But instead of doing what he had done with the Cushites, praying and trusting God for deliverance, Asa decided to handle this crisis through human wisdom. Verses 2-3 describe his plan. Asa then took the silver and gold out of the treasuries of the Lord's temple and of his own palace, and sent it to Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, who was ruling in Damascus. "Let there be a treaty between me and you," he said, "as there was between my father and your father. See, I'm sending you silver and gold. Now break your treaty with Baasha, king of Israel, so he will withdraw from me." The plan worked perfectly from a human perspective. Verse 4 tells us, Ben-Hadad agreed with King Asa and sent the commanders of his forces against the towns of Israel. They conquered Ijon, Dan, Abel-Maim, and all the store cities of Naphtali. From every human perspective, this was brilliant diplomacy, but God saw it very differently. Verse 7 introduces a prophet who had some hard words for the king. At that time, Hanani the seer came to Asa, king of Judah, and said to him, "Because you relied on the king of Aram and not on the Lord your God, the army of the king of Aram has escaped from your hand." The prophet reminded Asa of what God could do. Verse 8 brought back memories of the king's greatest triumph. Were not the Cushites and Libyans a mighty army with great numbers of chariots and horsemen? Yet when you relied on the Lord, he delivered them into your hand. Hanani's conclusion was both an encouragement and a rebuke. Verse 9 contains one of the most famous verses about God's faithfulness. For the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. You have done a foolish thing, and from now on you will be at war. But the most tragic part of this story is Asa's response to the rebuke. Verse 10 tells us, Asa was angry with the seer because of this. He was so enraged that he put him in prison. At the same time, Asa brutally oppressed some of the people. The chapter ends with a final example of Asa's spiritual decline. Verse 12 records, "In the 39th year of his reign, Asa was afflicted with a disease in his feet. Though his disease was severe, even then he did not seek help from the Lord, but only from the physicians. When Asa died, his son Jehoshaphat became king and immediately began to reverse his father's late spiritual decline." Chapter 17 verse 3 summarizes his approach. "The Lord was with Jehoshaphat because he followed the ways of his father David's earlier days. He did not consult the Baals." God's response to this faithfulness was immediate and obvious. Verses 5 to 6 describe the blessing that followed. "The Lord established the kingdom under his control, and all Judah brought gifts to Jehoshaphat, so that he had great wealth and honor. His heart was devoted to the ways of the Lord. Furthermore, he removed the high places and the Asherah poles from Judah. But Jehoshaphat understood something that many leaders miss. Having power isn't enough if people don't know how to live right. So he launched the most comprehensive education program in Judah's history." Verses 7 to 9 describe this remarkable initiative. "In the 3rd year of his reign, he sent his officials Ben-Hail, Obadiah, Zechariah, Nethanel, and Micaiah to teach in the towns of Judah. With them were certain Levites, Shemaiah, Nethaniah, Zebadiah, Asahel, Shemiramoth, Jehonathan, Adonijah, Dobijah, and Tobadonijah, and the priests Elishama and Jehoram. They taught throughout Judah, taking with them the book of the law of the Lord. They went around to all the towns of Judah and taught the people. The results were extraordinary." Verse 10 tells us, "The fear of the Lord fell on all the kingdoms of the land surrounding Judah, so that they did not go to war against Jehoshaphat. Instead of war, Judah's neighbors brought tribute." Verse 11 describes the wealth that flowed in. "Some Philistines brought Jehoshaphat gifts and silver as tribute, and the Arabs brought him flocks, 7,700 rams and 7,700 goats. Most importantly, he organized his military in a way that showed both wisdom and faith." Verses 14-18 give us the impressive numbers. "These were the men who served the king, besides those he stationed in the fortified cities throughout Judah. From Judah, commanders of units of 1,000, Adnah the commander, with 300,000 fighting men. Next, Jehohanan the commander with 280,000. Next, Amaziah, son of Zikri, who volunteered himself for the service of the Lord, with 200,000. From Benjamin, Eliada, a valiant soldier, with 200,000 men armed with bows and shields. Next, Jehozabad, with 180,000 men armed for battle. The total came to over 1,000,000 men, a massive army that showed God's blessing on Jehoshaphat's faithfulness. After the disasters of his father's later reign, Jehoshaphat had restored Judah to a position of strength and respect. Jehoshaphat's greatest mistake began with what seemed like a brilliant political move, a marriage alliance between his son and the daughter of Israel's king. But Ahab wasn't just any king. He was the most wicked ruler Israel had ever seen. married to the infamous Jezebel. Chapter 18 verse 1 tells us, "Now Jehoshaphat had great wealth and honor, and he allied himself with Ahab by marriage. This alliance would bring nothing but trouble for Judah. But at the time, it must have seemed like smart diplomacy. The real test came when Ahab invited his new ally to join him in battle. Verse 3 records the invitation. Ahab, king of Israel, asked Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, "Will you go with me against Ramoth-Gilead?" Jehoshaphat replied, "I am as you are, and my people as your people. We will join you in the war." But Jehoshaphat had one condition that would expose just how different these two kings really were. Verse 4 shows his wisdom. But Jehoshaphat also said to the king of Israel, "First seek the counsel of the Lord." Ahab was happy to oblige. Verse 5 tells us, "So the king of Israel brought together the prophets, 400 men, and asked them, 'Shall we go to war against Ramoth-Gilead, or shall I not?' 'Go,' they answered, 'for God will give it into the king's hand.' But something felt wrong to Jehoshaphat. These weren't real prophets of the Lord. They were court prophets who told Ahab whatever he wanted to hear. Verse 6 shows Jehoshaphat's discernment. But Jehoshaphat asked, "Is there no longer a prophet of the Lord here whom we can inquire of?" Ahab's response was telling. Verse 7 records his reluctant admission. The king of Israel answered Jehoshaphat, "There is still one prophet through whom we can inquire of the Lord. But I hate him because he never prophesies anything good about me, but always bad. He is Micaiah, son of Imlah." When they brought Micaiah, the pressure was immediate. But the true prophet knew exactly where his loyalty lay. Verse 13 contains his famous response. But Micaiah said, "As surely as the Lord lives, I can tell him only what my God says." Then Micaiah told them what he had really seen. Verses 17 to 18 record his true vision. Then Micaiah answered, "I saw all Israel scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd, and the Lord said, 'These people have no master. Let each one go home in peace.'" The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "Didn't I tell you that he never prophesies anything good about me, but only bad?" Despite this clear warning from God, both kings went to battle anyway. Ahab tried to cheat death by disguising himself, as recorded in verse 29. The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "I will enter the battle in disguise, but you wear your royal robes, but you can't hide from God's judgment." Verse 33 tells us what happened. But someone drew his bow at random and hit the king of Israel between the sections of his armor. Ahab died that very day, exactly as Micaiah had predicted. As soon as Jehoshaphat returned to Jerusalem, God sent him a message through the prophet Jehu that would shake him to his core. Chapter 19 verse 2 records the seer's harsh words. Jehu the seer, the son of Hanani, went out to meet him and said to the king, "Should you help the wicked and love those who hate the Lord? Because of this, the wrath of the Lord is on you." But Jehu's rebuke came with encouragement. Verse 3 continues, "There is, however, some good in you, for you have rid the land of the Asherah poles and have set your heart on seeking God." Jehoshaphat took this correction to heart in a way that showed his genuine humility. Instead of defending his actions, he used this rebuke as motivation to become an even better king. Verse 4 tells us what he did next. Jehoshaphat lived in Jerusalem, and he went out again among the people from Beersheba to the hill country of Ephraim, and turned them back to the Lord, the God of their ancestors. But Jehoshaphat went beyond just preaching. He completely reformed Judah's entire justice system. Verses 5 to 6 describe his revolutionary approach. He appointed judges in the land, in each of the fortified cities of Judah. He told them, "Consider carefully what you do, because you are not judging for mere mortals, but for the Lord, who is with you whenever you give a verdict." His instructions to these judges showed just how seriously he took justice. Verse 7 records his charge, "Now let the fear of the Lord be on you. Judge carefully, for with the Lord our God there is no injustice or partiality or bribery." But Jehoshaphat didn't stop with local courts. He also reformed the appeal system in Jerusalem. Verse 8 tells us, "In Jerusalem also Jehoshaphat appointed some of the Levites, priests and heads of Israelite families, to administer the law of the Lord and to settle disputes." This wasn't just administrative reform, it was spiritual revival through the justice system. Just when Jehoshaphat thought he could focus on internal reforms, the greatest military crisis of his reign emerged. Chapter 20 verse 1 describes the terrifying threat. After this, the Moabites and Ammonites with some of the Meunites came to wage war against Jehoshaphat. The news got worse when scouts brought more details. Verse 2 contains the alarming report. Some people came and told Jehoshaphat, "A vast army is coming against you from Edom, from the other side of the Dead Sea. It is already in Hazizon Tamar, that is, En-Gedi." Jehoshaphat's response shows what he had learned from his earlier mistakes. Instead of rushing into alliances with foreign kings, he did something that changed everything. Verse 3 tells us, "Alarmed, Jehoshaphat resolved to inquire of the Lord, and he proclaimed a fast for all Judah." What followed was one of the most powerful public prayers in the entire Bible. Verses 6 to 9 record the beginning of his prayer. "Lord, the God of our ancestors, are you not the God who is in heaven? You rule over all the kingdoms of the nations. Power and might are in your hand, and no one can withstand you. Our God, did you not drive out the inhabitants of this land before your people Israel, and give it forever to the descendants of Abraham your friend? They have lived in it, and have built in it a sanctuary for your name, saying, 'If calamity comes upon us, whether the sword of judgment or plague or famine, we will stand in this sanctuary before you and cry out to you in our distress, and you will hear us and save us.'" Then Jehoshaphat got specific about the current crisis. Verses 10 to 12 contain his desperate plea, "But now here are men from Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, whose territory you would not allow Israel to invade when they came from Egypt. So they turned away from them and did not destroy them. See how they are repaying us by coming to drive us out of the possession you gave us as an inheritance. Our God, will you not judge them? We have no power to face this vast army that is attacking us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you." The answer came immediately through a young Levite named Jahaziel. Verses 15 to 17 contain his prophetic encouragement. He said, "Listen, King Jehoshaphat, and all who live in Judah and Jerusalem. This is what the Lord says to you. Do not be afraid or discouraged because of this vast army. For the battle is not yours but God's. Tomorrow march down against them. They will be climbing up by the pass of Ziz, and you will find them at the end of the gorge in the desert of Jeruel. You will not have to fight this battle. Take up your positions. Stand firm and see the deliverance the Lord will give you, Judah and Jerusalem. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Go out to face them tomorrow, and the Lord will be with you." Early the next morning, they set out for what would be the strangest military campaign in history. Verse 21 describes their unusual battle formation. After consulting the people, Jehoshaphat appointed men to sing to the Lord and to praise him for the splendor of his holiness as they went out at the head of the army, saying, "Give thanks to the Lord, for his love endures forever." What happened next was beyond anything they could have imagined. Verses 22 to 23 describe God's incredible intervention. As they began to sing and praise, the Lord set ambushes against the men of Ammon and Moab and Mount Seir who were invading Judah, and they were defeated. The Ammonites and Moabites rose up against the men from Mount Seir to destroy and annihilate them. After they finished slaughtering the men from Seir, they helped to destroy one another. When Judah's army reached the battlefield, they couldn't believe what they saw. Verse 24 tells us, "When the men of Judah came to the place that overlooks the desert and looked toward the vast army, they saw only dead bodies lying on the ground. No one had escaped. When Jehoshaphat died, everything changed. His son Jehoram had married Athaliah, daughter of the wicked Ahab and Jezebel, and she brought all her family's evil influences with her to Judah." Chapter 21, verse 4, describes Jehoram's first act as king. When Jehoram established himself firmly over his father's kingdom, he put all his brothers to the sword, along with some of the officials of Israel. Verse 6 explains where this evil came from. He followed the ways of the kings of Israel, as the house of Ahab had done, for he married a daughter of Ahab. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. God's response came through the most unexpected messenger, a letter from the prophet Elijah. Verses 12-15 contain Elijah's written judgment. Jehoram received a letter from Elijah the prophet, which said, "This is what the Lord, the God of your father David, says, you have not followed the ways of your father Jehoshaphat or of Asa king of Judah, but you have followed the ways of the kings of Israel, and you have led Judah and the people of Jerusalem to prostitute themselves, just as the house of Ahab did. You have also murdered your own brothers, members of your own family, men who were better than you. So now the Lord is about to strike your people, your sons, your wives, and everything that is yours, with a heavy blow. You yourself will be very ill with a lingering disease of the bowels, until the disease causes your bowels to come out." The judgment began immediately with foreign invasions. Verses 16-17 describe the attacks. The Lord aroused against Jehoram the hostility of the Philistines and of the Arabs who lived near the Cushites. They attacked Judah, invaded it, and carried off all the goods found in the king's palace, together with his sons and wives. Not a son was left to him except Ahaziah the youngest, but the worst was yet to come. Verses 18-19 describe the fulfillment of Elijah's prophecy. After all this, the Lord afflicted Jehoram with an incurable disease of the bowels. In the course of time, at the end of the second year, his bowels came out because of the disease, and he died in great pain. His people made no funeral fire in his honor, as they had for his predecessors. Jehoram's only surviving son became king, but Ahaziah was completely under the influence of his mother Athaliah. Chapter 22, verse 3 explains the problem. He too followed the ways of the house of Ahab, for his mother encouraged him to act wickedly. The end came when Ahaziah decided to visit his cousin Joram, king of Israel. Verse 7 tells us, through this visit to Joram, God brought about Ahaziah's downfall. When Ahaziah arrived, he went out with Joram to meet Jehu son of Nimshi, whom the Lord had anointed to destroy the house of Ahab. Jehu killed them both. Ahaziah's 1-year reign was over, but the real crisis was just beginning back in Jerusalem. When news reached Athaliah that her son was dead, she did something that shocked everyone. Verse 10 records her horrible decision. When Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she proceeded to destroy the whole royal family of Judah. But God had made a promise to David that his dynasty would continue forever. Verse 11 tells us about a hidden rescue. But Jehoshabeth, the daughter of King Jehoram and wife of the priest Jehoiada, took Joash son of Ahaziah and stole him away from among the royal princes who were being murdered. She put him and his nurse in a bedroom. One baby survived the massacre. Joash was hidden in the temple, the one place Athaliah would never think to look for him. For 6 long years, the most evil woman in Judah's history sat on David's throne. But she didn't know about the baby hiding in God's house. After 6 years of Athaliah's evil reign, the faithful priest Jehoiada decided it was time to act. Chapter 23, verse 1 describes how carefully he planned the coup. In the 7th year, Jehoiada showed his strength. He made a covenant with the commanders of units of 100. The moment of revelation was dramatic. Verses 10-11 describe the coronation. He stationed all the men, each with his weapon in his hand, around the king, near the altar and the temple. From the south side to the north side of the temple, Jehoiada and his sons brought out the king's son and put the crown on him. They presented him with a copy of the covenant and proclaimed him king. They anointed him and shouted, "Long live the king!" When Athaliah heard the noise and saw what was happening, she cried, "Treason!" But it was too late. Jehoiada ordered her execution, and with Athaliah gone, he led the people in renewing their covenant with God. The first order of business was cleaning up the religious mess. Verse 17 describes the response. All the people went to the temple of Baal and tore it down. They smashed the altars and idols and killed Mattan the priest of Baal in front of the altars. After 6 years of evil rule, God's chosen king was finally on David's throne where he belonged. As Joash grew older under Jehoiada's guidance, he became concerned about the condition of God's house. Chapter 24 verse 4 tells us, sometime later Joash decided to restore the temple of the Lord. His first attempt at fundraising wasn't successful, so Joash came up with an innovative solution. Verses 8 to 9 describe his creative approach. At the king's command, a chest was made and placed outside. At the gate of the temple of the Lord, a proclamation was then issued in Judah and Jerusalem that they should bring to the Lord the tax that Moses, the servant of God, had required of Israel in the wilderness. The response exceeded all expectations. Verse 10 tells us, all the officials and all the people brought their contributions gladly. They dropped them into the chest until it was full. The renovation was so successful that they had money left over for new furnishings. Everything went perfectly as long as the faithful priest was alive to guide the young king. But then came a tragic turning point. Verse 15 records Jehoiada's death. Now Jehoiada was old and full of years, and he died at the age of 130. With Jehoiada gone, everything changed. Verse 18 reveals the new officials' influence. They abandoned the temple of the Lord, the God of their ancestors, and worshipped Asherah poles and idols. The final tragedy came when Joash ordered the murder of Zechariah, Jehoiada's son, who tried to warn the people about their apostasy. The king had forgotten everything his mentor had done for him. When Joash was assassinated, his son Amaziah became king and immediately brought justice for his father's murder. Chapter 25 verse 4 explains, Yet he did not put their children to death, but acted in accordance with what is written in the law, in the book of Moses. Amaziah's next challenge was dealing with Edom. He prepared his army and hired additional soldiers from Israel, but a prophet warned him not to use the northern troops. Verse 9 records Amaziah's concern about the money he had paid, and the prophet's response. The man of God replied, The Lord can give you much more than that. So Amaziah dismissed the hired soldiers and trusted God for victory. The campaign against Edom was a complete success. Verses 11-12 describe the victory. Amaziah then marshaled his strength and led his army to the Valley of Salt, where he killed 10,000 men of Seir. The army of Judah also captured 10,000 men alive, took them to the top of a cliff, and threw them down so that all were dashed to pieces. But the real tragedy was what happened after his military victory. Verse 14 describes his shocking decision. When Amaziah returned from slaughtering the Edomites, he brought back the gods of the people of Seir. He set them up as his own gods, bowed down to them and burned sacrifices to them. Why would he worship the gods of a people he had just defeated? God sent a prophet to confront him, but Amaziah rejected the warning. His military success against Edom proved that God could give victory when his people trusted him. But his adoption of foreign gods showed how quickly success could lead to spiritual compromise. When Amaziah's son Ahaz became king, he brought a level of evil to Judah that shocked even those who remembered the worst of previous reigns. Chapter 28 verse 2 tells us, He did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as his father David had done, but Ahaz went far beyond just neglecting God. He actively embraced the most horrible practices of the pagan nations around him. Verse 3 describes his shocking behavior. He offered sacrifices in the valley of Ben Hinnom and burned his children in the fire, engaging in the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. This wasn't just idol worship. This was child sacrifice. Ahaz was literally burning his own sons and daughters alive as offerings to foreign gods. God's response to this evil was swift and severe. Verse 5 describes the first disaster. Therefore the Lord his God delivered him into the hands of the king of Aram. The Arameans defeated him and took many of his people as prisoners and brought them to Damascus. He was also given into the hands of the king of Israel, who inflicted heavy casualties on him. The attack from Israel was particularly devastating. Verses 6-7 give us the horrifying numbers. In one day, Pekah son of Remaliah killed 120,000 soldiers in Judah, because Judah had forsaken the Lord, the God of their ancestors. Zikri, an Ephraimite warrior, killed Maaseiah the king's son, Azrikam the officer in charge of the palace, and Elkanah, second to the king. 120,000 soldiers dead in a single day. Even Ahaz's own son was killed in the battle. Verse 8 tells us, the Israelites took captive from their fellow Israelites, who were from Judah 200,000 wives, sons and daughters. Instead of turning to God for help, Ahaz made the same mistake so many kings before him had made. He looked for help from a foreign power. Verse 16 describes his faithless decision. At that time, King Ahaz sent to the kings of Assyria for help, but the Assyrians weren't interested in helping. Verse 20 tells us, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came to him, but he gave him trouble instead of help. The worst part was how Ahaz responded to all these disasters. Verses 22-23 describe his twisted thinking. In his time of trouble, King Ahaz became even more unfaithful to the Lord. He offered sacrifices to the gods of Damascus, who had defeated him. For he thought, since the gods of the kings of Aram have helped them, I will sacrifice to them so they will help me. But they were his ruin and the ruin of all Israel. Ahaz's final acts as king showed just how completely he had rejected God. Verse 24 tells us, Ahaz gathered together the furnishings from the temple of God and cut them in pieces. He shut the doors of the Lord's temple and set up altars at every street corner in Jerusalem. When Ahaz's son Hezekiah became king, everything changed overnight. Chapter 29 verse 2 summarizes his approach. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done. Hezekiah's first priority was undoing the spiritual damage his father had caused. Verse 3 tells us what he did immediately. In the first month of the first year of his reign, he opened the doors of the temple of the Lord and repaired them. Hezekiah called together all the priests and Levites for an urgent meeting. Verses 4-5 describe the gathering. He brought in the priests and the Levites, assembled them in the square on the east side, and said to them, Listen to me, Levites. Consecrate yourselves now and consecrate the temple of the Lord, the God of your ancestors. Remove from the sanctuary the impurity that is in it. The king understood exactly what had gone wrong. Verses 6-7 contain his analysis. Our parents were unfaithful. They did evil in the eyes of the Lord our God and forsook him. They turned their faces away from the Lord's dwelling place and turned their backs on him. They also shut the doors of the portico and put out the lamps. But the king had a plan to fix everything. Verse 10 reveals his determination. Now I intend to make a covenant with the Lord, the God of Israel, so that his fierce anger will turn away from us. The priests and Levites responded immediately. The cleaning process was massive and took 16 days to complete. Verse 17 tells us, they began the consecration on the first day of the first month, and by the 8th day of the month they reached the portico of the Lord. For 8 more days, they consecrated the temple of the Lord itself, finishing on the 16th day of the first month. Early the next morning, Hezekiah gathered the city officials and went up to the temple. When they began the burnt offerings that would restore regular worship, verse 27 describes what happened. As the offering began, singing to the Lord began also, accompanied by trumpets and the instruments of David, king of Israel. The scene was overwhelming. Verse 28 continues, the whole assembly bowed in worship while the musicians played and the trumpets sounded. All this continued until the sacrifice of the burnt offering was completed. After years of spiritual darkness, God's house was alive again with worship and sacrifice. With the temple cleansed and proper worship restored, Hezekiah decided to celebrate the Passover. But this wouldn't be just an ordinary celebration. Chapter 30 verse 1 tells us about the king's bold decision. Hezekiah sent word to all Israel and Judah, and also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh, inviting them to come to the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem and celebrate the Passover to the Lord, the God of Israel. The messengers went throughout both kingdoms with the king's invitation. Verses 6 and 9 contain Hezekiah's letter, People of Israel, return to the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, that he may return to you who are left, who have escaped from the hand of the kings of Assyria. Do not be like your parents and your fellow Israelites, who were unfaithful to the Lord, the God of their ancestors, so that he made them an object of horror, as you see. Do not be stiff-necked as your ancestors were. Submit to the Lord. The response was mixed. Verse 10 tells us, the couriers went from town to town in Ephraim and Manasseh as far as Zebulun, but people scorned and ridiculed them. But not everyone felt that way. Verse 11 gives us the encouraging news. Nevertheless, some from Asher, Manasseh and Zebulun humbled themselves and went to Jerusalem. When the time came, Jerusalem filled with people from all over the land. Verse 13 tells us, a very large crowd of people assembled in Jerusalem to celebrate the festival of unleavened bread in the 2nd month. The celebration was so joyful that nobody wanted it to end. Verse 23 tells us, the whole assembly then agreed to celebrate the festival 7 more days. So for another 7 days, they celebrated joyfully. 14 days of celebration, twice as long as the law required. The last part of verse 26 captures the magnitude of what had happened. There was great joy in Jerusalem. For since the days of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, there had been nothing like this in Jerusalem. But the best part was what happened next. Chapter 31, verse 1 tells us, when all this had ended, the Israelites who were present went out to the towns of Judah, smashed the sacred stones, and cut down the Asherah poles. They destroyed the high places and the altars throughout Judah and Benjamin, and in Ephraim and Manasseh, until they had destroyed them all. With the spiritual revival in full swing, Hezekiah turned his attention to organizing the practical aspects of temple worship. Chapter 31 verse 2 tells us, Hezekiah assigned the priests and Levites to divisions, each of them according to their duties as priests or Levites, to offer burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, to minister, to give thanks, and to sing praises at the gates of the Lord's dwelling. But Hezekiah wanted the people to participate too. Verse 4 records his command. He ordered the people living in Jerusalem to give the portion due the priests and Levites, so they could devote themselves to the law of the Lord. The response was overwhelming. Verse 5 tells us, as soon as the order went out, the Israelites generously gave the first fruits of their grain, new wine, olive oil and honey, and all that the fields produced. They brought a great amount, a tithe of everything. The amount was so large that it created logistical problems. Verse 10 contains the priest's happy response. Since the people began to bring their contributions to the temple of the Lord, we have had enough to eat and plenty to spare, because the Lord has blessed his people, and this great amount is left over. The result was a kingdom where God was honored and his servants were well cared for. Verse 21 explains why everything worked so well. In everything that he undertook in the service of God's temple and in obedience to the law and the commands, he sought his God and worked wholeheartedly. And so he prospered. After all these years of faithfulness and prosperity, Hezekiah faced the greatest crisis of his reign. Chapter 32 verse 1 tells us, after all that Hezekiah had so faithfully done, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and invaded Judah. He laid siege to the fortified cities, thinking to conquer them for himself. When Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib intended to fight, he made careful preparations. Verses 2-4 describe his strategy. When Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come and that he intended to wage war against Jerusalem, he consulted with his officials and military staff about blocking off the water from the springs outside the city, and they helped him. But the king knew that military preparations alone wouldn't be enough. Verses 6 to 8 record his speech to the army. He appointed military officers over the people and assembled them before him in the square at the city gate and encouraged them with these words, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged because of the king of Assyria and the vast army with him, for there is a greater power with us than with him. With him is only the arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles." Instead of attacking Jerusalem directly, Sennacherib tried psychological warfare. The Assyrian messengers spoke loudly in Hebrew so all the people could hear their threats. But the most blasphemous part was how they talked about the Lord. Verse 19 records their horrible words. They spoke about the God of Jerusalem as they did about the gods of the other peoples of the world, the work of human hands. Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah knew exactly what to do. Verse 20 tells us, King Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz, cried out in prayer to heaven about this. Their prayer was answered in the most dramatic way possible. Verse 21 records what happened. And the Lord sent an angel who annihilated all the fighting men and the commanders and officers in the camp of the Assyrian king. So he withdrew to his own land in disgrace. One angel destroyed 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in a single night. When Hezekiah died, his son Manasseh became king at the age of 12. Chapter 33, verse 2, summarizes the new king's approach. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Following the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites, Manasseh didn't just neglect his father's reforms, he actively undid them. Verse 3 tells us, he rebuilt the high places his father Hezekiah had demolished. He also erected altars to the Baals and made Asherah poles, but his rebellion went even further. Verse 6 describes horrors that rivaled anything his grandfather Ahaz had done. He sacrificed his children in the fire in the valley of Ben Hinnom, practiced divination and witchcraft, sought omens, and consulted mediums and spiritists. The impact on the nation was devastating. Verse 9 explains, but Manasseh led Judah and the people of Jerusalem astray, so that they did more evil than the nations the Lord had destroyed before the Israelites. God sent prophets to warn them, but nobody listened. Verses 10 to 11 tell us, the Lord spoke to Manasseh and his people, but they paid no attention. So the Lord brought against them the army commanders of the king of Assyria, who took Manasseh prisoner, put a hook in his nose, bound him with bronze shackles, and took him to Babylon. The captivity accomplished what years of prophetic warnings couldn't do. Verse 12 tells us, in his distress he sought the favor of the Lord his God, and humbled himself greatly before the God of his ancestors. This wasn't just political maneuvering, it was genuine repentance. Verse 13 continues, and when he prayed to him, the Lord was moved by his entreaty and listened to his plea. So he brought him back to Jerusalem and to his kingdom. When Manasseh died, his son Amon became king and immediately returned to the old evil ways. But Amon's reign was mercifully short. Verse 24 tells us, Amon's officials conspired against him and assassinated him in his palace. An 8-year-old boy named Josiah was now king of Judah. When 8-year-old Josiah became king, nobody could have predicted that this child would lead the greatest spiritual revival in Judah's history. Chapter 34, verse 2 tells us, he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and followed the ways of his father David, not turning aside to the right or to the left. As Josiah grew up, his commitment to God deepened. Verse 3 describes his spiritual development. In the 8th year of his reign, while he was still young, he began to seek the God of his father David. In his 12th year, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of high places, Asherah poles, and idols. In his 18th year as king, Josiah decided to repair the temple. But during the renovation work, something incredible happened. Verse 14 tells us, while they were bringing out the money that had been taken into the temple of the Lord, Hilkiah the priest found the book of the law of the Lord that had been given through Moses. The book of the law had been lost for decades. But now, just when Josiah was seeking to serve God wholeheartedly, the lost scripture was found. When Josiah heard the words of the law, his response was immediate and dramatic. Verse 19 tells us, "When the king heard the words of the law, he tore his robes." The prophetess Huldah gave them a message that was both terrifying and encouraging. The nation would face judgment, but Josiah himself would die in peace because of his faithfulness. So Josiah gathered all the people together for a covenant renewal ceremony. Verses 29-31 describe this historic gathering. Then the king called together all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. He went up to the temple of the Lord with the people of Judah, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the priests and the Levites, all the people from the least to the greatest. He read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant, which had been found in the temple of the Lord. The result was the most thorough religious reform in Judah's history. To celebrate the spiritual renewal, Josiah held a Passover celebration that would be remembered forever. Chapter 35, verse 18 tells us, "The Passover had not been observed like this in Israel since the days of the prophet Samuel, and none of the kings of Israel had ever celebrated such a Passover as did Josiah. But then, tragically, everything changed." Verse 20 introduces the crisis. After all this, when Josiah had set the temple in order, Necho, king of Egypt, went up to fight at Carchemish on the Euphrates, and Josiah marched out to meet him in battle. Despite Necho's attempts to avoid conflict, Josiah insisted on fighting. Verse 23 tells us what happened. Archers shot King Josiah, and he told his officers, "Take me away. I'm badly wounded." Josiah died on the way back to Jerusalem. The death of Josiah marked the beginning of the end for the kingdom of Judah. Chapter 36 tells the story of the last 4 kings. Jehoahaz reigned only 3 months before being deposed by Egypt. Jehoiakim was made king by Necho but did evil. During his reign, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon began the deportations that would eventually empty the land. Jehoiakim reigned only 3 months before being taken to Babylon. Zedekiah was Judah's last king, and he proved to be just as faithless as his predecessors. The final siege was brutal. Verses 17-19 describe the end. He brought up against them the king of the Babylonians, who killed their young men with the sword in the sanctuary, and did not spare young men or young women, the elderly or the infirm. God gave them all into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. He carried to Babylon all the articles from the temple of God, both large and small, and the treasures of the Lord's temple, and the treasures of the king and his officials. They set fire to God's temple and broke down the wall of Jerusalem. They burned all the palaces and destroyed everything of value there. The kingdom that had lasted for over 400 years was finished. But even in this darkest moment, there was hope. Verse 22 tells us about a new beginning. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm. The exile wouldn't last forever. God always keeps his promises. If this journey through 2 Chronicles has opened your eyes to something new about God's faithfulness or challenged you to examine your own heart, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into God's Word, and hit that share button to help others discover these incredible stories that have the power to transform lives. Until next time.